It's not uncommon within Battle Shonen series throughout the large scope of their whole power system and power levels and where all the different big lore characters and everybody rank, than to have one of those characters be a shadowish version of their former self, to never see them in that peak pinnacle of their stature, to see the full bulk of where their reputation came from. Because there's always certain variables that tend to either wear down a character, from old age to general situational circumstances. You have characters like Sarutobi from Naruto or Whitebeard from One Piece, who we only really saw them in their more older stages of life when they were far past their prime, yet still they were known for being powerful at the time of their old age. For Fairy Tail, we have Igneel, and for Igneel, it's not so much as it was age. Obviously, he was a dragon, and we don't know how long dragons actually live. As far as we know, they will just keep living. I assume that there is a point, somewhere along the line that they will die of old age, but who knows? Obviously, different fictions do different things with dragons, and we don't know how a dragon will die in terms of lengths of time from natural causes. So Igneel's age obviously wasn't a factor in it, but the thing that was after he and the other members of the dragons that partook the Dragon Slayer plan had their souls ripped out of their bodies by Acnologia at a point, and then spent their respective next chunks of their lives working on creating antibodies to prevent their Dragon Slayers becoming full dragons, the same as Acnologia did. Now, that obviously, when Igneel showed up, it's the first time we were seeing a big dragon in action. Because with Mother Grade and Atlas Flame, they were strong, but we knew that Igneel was a dragon king, and we only know a few people that sit at that royal level of dragon. We know Irene was, because Irene even brings it up herself. She wasn't, she didn't gain that title off of just stature. It obviously had to do with her power and capabilities as well. And then people like, now we also have Alexion added to the lore, but Igneel being the first big one we knew of, he had to obviously be a cut above the rest. And it's hard to really gauge that, because when you look at, say, the larger scope of the humans, you can look at, say, okay, yeah, you got people like, oh, where S class are, okay, above them are the Wizard Saints, and then you got a couple miscellaneous people like Hades and Margear, and then bam, you got, well, not humanoid characters, rather, non-dragons, I had to specify that because Margear's not human, but along that line, and then you get obviously to the Spriggan and stuff, and then eventually people like Zareth. But with the dragons, it's really hard to gauge them, just from, we don't really know where the average dragon sits. We don't really have many fights with them, since people without the dragon attribute can't really damage them. I assume if you were powerful enough that you could overwhelm their resistance to magic, like if August fought some random fodder dragon and use Ars Magia, I'm sure it would erase him and not just be like, oh yeah, it's not going to hurt him. I'm sure there's some form of just threshold that if you break past, then they're not going to be able to handle it. But Igneel, because of that, we only saw him fight Acnologia at a fraction of his power. Because we also know that on top of being, a again shadow of where he was, both physically and literally, not literally a shadow, but a soul that was literally just a split piece of him. But we know that he left Natsu a fraction, well, not necessarily a fraction, a portion of his power, an unknown percentage. People have always assumed it was 50%. I felt like that was always kind of just the easiest go-to. Left half of it, maybe Prime Igneel was twice as powerful as he was. But the question is, where does he really sit? Because when you, like I said, when you bring up all the different ranks like Wizard Saint, Spriggan and stuff, there's a lot of people that you can use to kind of compare and look around to say okay, well, these characters would fit here. You have some general probably wiggle room of what character would sit slightly above another and what one is going to be below another. But with the dragons, it's really hard to say because, like I said, the first time we really see a dragon action, it's Acnologia, but Acnologia is, the top of the dragon food chain. And then we see some general dragons with, again, Mother Glare and Atlas Flame. But we don't really know what the gap is between them and Igneel. And we don't even know where they are compared to a weakened Igneel. So then Prime Igneel is a completely other, mystery sitting within the story. I think that there's a couple pieces that you can look at and really build an idea of where Prime Igneel, quote unquote, really would have sat. But, as it were, we're about like 5 minutes in this video. I needed some build up and, laying out the idea to really go into where I think you can look at the idea of where Prime Igneel could have been in a way that fits into the story. So right now it's just like, oh yeah, a complete mystery. We don't have any idea of where he really sat. We just knew that he was stronger than where he was at before, and where he was at before was able to keep up with and contend with Acnologia. Though Acnologia wasn't serious, like fully serious, that's still better than, what 99% of the verse would have been able to do. But there are a couple of comments from the characters within the series that give a little bit of an idea of where Igneel could have been at, like where he could have sat strength-wise, and again, things could have made sense. It could have done a lot for the lore. But this is obviously just going to be a bit of speculation, a bit of a theory-ish, kind of what-if-ish, at the same time, again, speculation on where he kind of is at, because obviously Igneel should be above, again, most people. The only people that are definitively above him are the dragon gods and Acnologia. And some of them might not even be the full case. Like, I would be very curious to know if Dogremag would actually sit above or below Igneel, especially Prime Igneel. Because if Acnologia was able to get damaged by Igneel even at a weaker state, I would imagine his full power should be more than enough to defeat Dogremag. If dragon form Acnologia, should be well above dragon form Dogremag. I don't believe at all that Dogremag would be able to be even close to what Acnologia is capable of, obviously. But the two statements I think that are best to look at would be when one, and I think this is kind of connected to one theory, we'll go into it. Well, there was the idea that Prime Igneel would have been able to defeat Acnologia, like he was stronger than Acnologia, and I don't think that was the case. At least from what we know of as the idea of where Prime Igneel could have, was at. I do have an idea where Prime Igneel could have been, that could have actually been above Acnologia, but I'll get to that in a moment. What we get from Igneel is when Igneel is pinned down from Acnologia, being harmed, he says that Acnologia is far stronger than what he previously thought that he was at. Which means, at the point where Acnologia was deemed enough of an issue that they formed the Dragon Slaying plan, that Igneel believed that Acnologia was more of enough of a threat that he wouldn't have been able just to handle him on his own. So at the point where Acnologia was brought to his attention that they had to do something, Igneel was not confident that he would have been able to go and just take him down. So that Igneel was definitely not more powerful than the Acnologia that came out at that point. And on top of that, he said that the Acnologia that he encountered in Tartaros, that wasn't even going all out at the time, was more powerful than the version that he had previously clearly deemed enough of a threat he couldn't take on his own. So Acnologia clearly would have been more powerful than those incarnations of Igneel. Now, the thing though about that, why obviously I had the buildup of talking about like the Age of Dragons, how long they can live for. We don't know the fact that, how long they can generally have for a lifespan, thousands of years, tens of thousands, who knows? Maybe just a couple hundred. Well, I assume not a couple hundred, based off literally the Dragon Gods are all 400 plus. But what if Igneel is older than we thought he was? The thing is, the year that they came out of what, 777. That means 400 years prior, when it was 377, was when they sent him into the future. Roughly, obviously, give or take some time. But assuming that it's not going to be like the Rave Master where every 999 years the calendar resets. Let's just say we have that 377 years. What if Igneel is far older rather, than what we know of, and he is just past his prime, well further down than we really estimated? What if Prime Igneel wasn't at the point where Acnologia rose up? What if he was already well beyond the point of being in his prime? Where say his prime was for a dragon, let's just say like early 30s and equivalent to a human years, whatever the dragon equivalent of the early 30s. But when he met Natsu, maybe why he has such an older voice actor is because he's an older dragon and he's just a much more aged version of what he previously was. And maybe he's just not in his physical prime anymore. Who knows? I think that would make sense that it could be like, oh, his fire just wasn't as hot or his physical strength wasn't enough. Maybe that's why he wouldn't have been able to regenerate as well. Granted, he was a soul, but still. Because when Igneel is talking about him, Igneel is saying that Igneel was the strongest dragon. Obviously, Acnologia, not technically being a real dragon, you being an artificial dragon. And on top of that, Igneel predating him, maybe Igneel knows something that just hasn't been revealed to the readers yet. Again, what if it's like, oh yeah, Igneel, gained the title of the first dragon, the first dragon to become a king of a branch of dragons. Not king of dragons, but he was the first one to become the king of a type of dragon. Maybe Alexion came after him or something. Igneel was the first one. Or maybe he was just the first one for fire dragons, because it's like, oh, fire dragons, there's just, more of them compared to other dragons. It seemed impossible or something. And then it's like, oh yeah, well, Igneel, say like if Igneel was in his prime in the year X 150 or something, so it had already been over 200 years past his prime, or something like that, something along those lines. Obviously this is just an idea, but I think it could make a lot of sense based off of what we know about him. I think a much more chilled and relaxed nature being an older dragon would make a lot of sense. And on top of that, I think it would set up a larger scale lore that would be really cool, because granted, we really, like, most of the deep lore we have is 400 years prior, and we don't know exactly if there's anything crazy from history prior to because really the furthest back we have is pretty much Ankh-Saram, and realistically, because Zeref, Acnologia, and Irene should all be relatively around the same time, so the only person further back would be that. So it's like Igneel, I would assume, because he would have been already a dragon and been alive at the time, but who knows? Again, the idea of if, say, like, instead of him just being a couple hundred, like, what if he was close to 1,000? And it's just because of Acnologia's crazy growth and broken dragon slaying magic that he was able to defeat an older, weakened Igneel. Maybe that's something we'll get. We can get some Igneel hype. Maybe that's something we'll get when we get to Ignea. I think it would make sense if we were going to find out some new lore on Igneel. It would be from somebody like Ignea, when it's like, oh yeah, in the stories I heard, my father was the greatest dragon in terms of strength at one point, and then he got soft and he fell off in strength, and that's like, oh well, that's why Ignea actually trains, as he doesn't want to ever fall out of his prime and then get beaten by somebody he shouldn't have lost to. Because I think that would actually be really cool too for the large scale lore. If it's, say, because Igneel started to get softer, he got weaker, and because of that, that's why Acnologia was able to defeat him in the first place. Because it's like, imagine if it's like, oh, if Igneel never got to that point where he became a kinder dragon, he would have been able just to defeat Acnologia at that time just fine. Like Acnologia at the time where he became obviously a big threat, Prime Igneel would have just went out and stomped him. Who knows? That could be something we get. Again, it could just be fan speculation. I'm kind of fine either way. Acnologia, obviously, still being at the top is fine. But I think it would be something that would make a lot of fair reasoning if it's like if there was going to be another dragon that would have overtaken him, it'd be Igneel, because, one, obviously, lore-wise, Igneel was a big deal, connection to main character and stuff, connection to Ignea, but also it's like he's a core fire dragon, like, very, very, like, foundation fantasy and design, and, obviously, like, how he operates. So it's like, oh, if he just never, went along that better pathway and stayed in this younger, ferocious, primal kind of manner, he would have been able to do it. But because he grew as an individual and was able to kind of gain a better perspective of others, that he got weaker, and then that made him open to lose. And then you can kind of have something like that for Natsu to kind of figure out, and like kind of have some form of pole vault for him to have an interaction with Ignea over it. So I think that'd be cool. I think it would make really cool sense if, say, like, Ignea has a lot of frustration, and it's like saying that his father got weaker, otherwise he would have been able to to beat Acnologia. But anyway, that's about it for this one. It's something that it's hard to say, because when you have those characters who only, that the idea of them in their prime, unless you actually are just outright shown it, it's hard to gauge them, because those characters are usually the reason you don't see them in their prime. It's like Ryzen from Yu Yu Hakusho. He was the weakest out of the, the demon rulers? I can't remember what they're exactly called at the end of the series, but that's because he just didn't eat and he got way weaker, or it was like what they said, that his stomach growls would like shake the demon world or whatever, and he was clearly the most powerful when he actually ate. But it's like you never actually get to see him. Or again, Sarutobi or Whitebeard, you never actually get to see them in that state. So unless you get that flashback, you're not gonna ever get that. Like, you're showing them in their old versions and their weakened versions, and they're still OP. So it's like you gotta just kind of keep that prime version as like a fantasy, I feel. But anyway, other than that, comment below. Tell me your thoughts about this. Is it something you've always wondered about Prime Igneel, about like where he kind of sits and like where he could have sat? Where was he at his peak, and like what was he capable of when he was at his peak? Because I think that's something that it's easy to say. It's like, if at his peak he was weaker than Acnologia, but it's like, what if his peak predated everything that happened with Acnologia? Because I would assume, say, it's just last thing, say, like, it's pre-Acnologia, pre-Dragon Slaying Magic, any of that. Igneel, even out of his prime, is the strongest dragon, and on top of that, he doesn't have any, like, crazy problems he has to deal with. It's just general dragon business. And then Acnologia comes in, and it's like he wouldn't be prepared for this anomaly that just shoots past pretty much everything in the norm. So, yeah, just tell me your thoughts are about the idea, obviously, of where Prime Igneel would have sat, what you think he would have been capable of. Who do you think he would have, like, been able to defeat? Do you think he would have been able to beat Dragon God level? I assume if Igneel stayed in that kind of training set, and, like, not like training, but just wanting to continue in growth and power, he probably would have been a Dragon God. But obviously, Acnologia interrupted the plans of the entire world of, further dragons. But anyway, other than that, comment below, thumbs up the video, befriend the like button, subscribe button, and check out my other videos. But that, appreciate everybody's already subscribed. Thank you all for listening. Bye.